Here's something that might surprise you: over 100 million people worldwide have learned English primarily through watching Friends, making it possibly the most successful unofficial language teaching tool ever created.
Well, that's a fascinating statistic. What makes this 90s sitcom such an effective language learning platform?
It comes down to this perfect storm of factors. Research shows that the show hits this sweet spot of using language that's just 10 to 15% above most learners' current level, which is exactly what linguistics experts say is optimal for language acquisition.
Let me add something interesting about that studies have found that viewers retain up to 30% more vocabulary when they're emotionally invested in the characters.
Hmm? And that emotional connection is exactly why certain phrases stick so well. Like, data shows that "how you doin'" is recognized by nearly 95% of English learners worldwide, even if they've never watched a full episode.
So, what makes the show's dialogue particularly effective for learning?
Well, linguistics research has identified that Friends uses about 2,000 of the most common English words repeatedly throughout its run, which happens to be exactly the vocabulary size needed for basic conversational fluency. And here's what's fascinating: the show naturally cycles through these words in different contexts, creating this organic, spaced repetition system.
That reminds me, recent studies show that learners who watch with subtitles in their native language first, then English subtitles, and finally no subtitles, improve their comprehension by up to 50%.
Oh, exactly. And you know what's really interesting? The show's various speaking speeds, from Phoebe's slower melodic delivery to Chandler's rapid-fire sarcasm, expose learners to the full spectrum of natural speech patterns. Language processing studies indicate this variety helps develop better listening comprehension.
Hmm. What about the cultural learning aspect? That seems just as important as the language itself.
Well, cultural linguists have actually mapped out how Friends introduces roughly 300 distinct American cultural concepts throughout its run, everything from Thanksgiving traditions to dating norms. And get this, learners who watch the show score 40% higher on tests of American cultural understanding compared to those who only use traditional textbooks.
Let me share something surprising. Modern language learning apps are now specifically designing their content to mirror the Friends formula of combining humor with repetitive language patterns.
That's exactly what makes this so revolutionary. And here's the kicker: neuroscience research shows that when learning happens through entertainment, the brain releases dopamine, which can increase memory retention by up to 40%. It's why people can quote episodes years later.
Well, that explains why streaming platforms report that Friends episodes are replayed an average of 3 times more often by language learners than native speakers.
You know what's even more fascinating? Studies of brain activity show that watching sitcoms like Friends activates the same neural pathways as real-life social interactions. So viewers are essentially getting the same linguistic benefits as they would from actual conversation practice.
That's incredible, and I understand modern language programs are now incorporating these findings into their teaching methods?
Oh, absolutely. The data shows that language schools using TV-based learning methods are seeing comprehension rates improve by up to 60% compared to traditional methods. And here's something wild: they found that students who learn through sitcoms are more likely to use idioms and colloquialisms correctly in conversation.
Well, speaking of modern applications, streaming platforms have really transformed how people use the show for learning.
Right? And the numbers back this up. Language learners spend an average of 45 minutes per episode when using streaming platforms, compared to the standard 22-minute runtime, because they're taking advantage of the pause and replay features. That extra time correlates with a 25% increase in vocabulary retention.
Let me point out something about the future implications. We're seeing a whole new generation of content and being created specifically for language learners based on these insights.
And that's where things get really exciting. Educational technology companies are now using AI to analyze what made Friends so effective and applying those patterns to create new content. Early studies show that this targeted approach could potentially accelerate language learning by up to 70%.
Well, it seems like we're just beginning to understand the full impact of entertainment-based language learning.
You know what? The legacy of Friends as a language learning tool might actually outweigh its cultural impact as a TV show.